Welcome to Massive Passive Cash Flow, the podcast that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth. Here's your host, Gary Wilson.
Welcome back to the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast. I'm Gary Wilson, your host, and I'm glad to have you back. If you wouldn't mind, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast. It's on 30 different channels. Of course, the big one being Apple, but whichever one works for you, that's okay with me. And while you're online, please visit globalinvestoragent.com. This is where you can find real estate agents. These are not typical agents. These agents are trained by us to work with us investors. They have the tools, the strategies, everything they need to identify, analyze, and negotiate on and off market deals, commercial and residential. This was a big deal, folks. And if you are an agent, boy, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to click on the Learn More button, because the market is entering into a shift. Can't tell you how bad it's going to be, how long it's going to be. We don't know those things. If we did, we'd all be gajillionaires. But the fact is it's a mathematical certainty. So why panic? Don't panic. It's time to prepare. Click on the Learn More button, learn more about this, and make this part of your agent model. So, hey, without further ado, we've got a great guest today, Adam Zock, all the way from North Dakota. And he's got a great story, guys, and a great business model. Particularly if you have small kids and you're trying to juggle life, business, your job, investing. I've been there before myself, and Zach has it all figured out down to an art and a science. So first off, Adam, thanks for joining us, man. I really appreciate you taking your time and energy to share with you your wisdom and your knowledge today.
I love what you're doing here, Gary, and the niche that you're in. It's a much needed service. We were reminiscing a little bit beforehand, and it's funny just talking about family, talking about real estate agents. I'm excited to connect with you here over the next 30 minutes or so.
Yeah. Well, I am too. I've been looking forward to this ever since you scheduled it. Now, what's interesting is we have similar paths. I'm a little bit older than you. You're 35 and I'm 36. Chuckle. But both have backgrounds in engineering. Yours, you're a true engineering degree. Mine was at the time was the first computer science degrees that around the country. It was part of the school of engineering. They just broke it off that year I was there as a freshman. But in any case, if you wouldn't mind, take us from, let's say, when you're in college or graduating to where you are today, because you made the shift much more quickly than I did, in an entrepreneurship. And I really admire that. If you wouldn't mind, paint that picture for people so they know what the context is,
For sure. Yeah. So growing up in a little small town of like 17,000 people, and then it was delayed gratification, get good school. So get good grades. So you go to college so you can get a good career, and then get a good career so that you can save for retirement and have a happy life. And all of that was like a 3-year span. I was like, okay, I can work hard in high school. Okay, I can work hard for 4 years of college. And then I was working hard as in engineering. And I was like, oh, wait a second, this payoff isn't quite there on the 40 years. So that's where I really started to question a lot, where I'd be like Googling at work, like, hey, do I really want to be a civil engineer? And the toughest part for me was to learn to actually be good at my job. I know very few individuals. I'd be curious from your perspective, kind of on the global side, of like very few people that are actually like bad employees that make good business owners. I typically run into the really good employees that are then like, oh, you know what, I can add value. I understand sales and marketing. And so like a lot of people are maybe stuck, and then I was the same. I was like blaming the circumstances, blaming different things. And so the first was like, oh, if I was just really going to get good at my job, what would that look like? So that I could be happy during the day, like just in general, like it's not going to be great, but like give me to a 7 or an 8. And then from there, it was like, okay, well, now you kind of got some different itches that you want to scratch, where it's like, oh, where's the next shiny ball? It could be fantasy sports, could be day trading, could be starting your own business. And then stumbled onto the real estate and was like, oh, this hits the engineering brain of disproportionate reward to risk. I was like, heads I win, tails I break even. And I was like, how can I do that more and more and more? Because that just seemed much better than the stock market kind of 40-year plan. And it felt worth the risk in my calculation brain. And so then it was one home in 2012. Then it was the next one, not until 2016. And then it's just kind of been exponential from there to the 50 that we got now in 13 different states, kind of buying them across the country.
Nice. Yeah, I know when I was working, you're right. The folks that were the top performers in the corporate world were generally the ones that did break out on their own. building their own businesses and investing and really being entrepreneurial. And I know for me, my thought was, gee, I can do better on my own. And other guys I knew too, the corporate world is so laden with overhead and so much wasted time and energy and space. And I don't even know how they make money, quite frankly. I'm thinking, boy, we can do this a lot more efficiently, a lot more profitably. So I actually started several businesses over the years, all related to real estate, of course. But I took my systems background and applied that to an industry that was relatively kind of disorganized, not very structured. Real estate, when I got into it as an agent, and I didn't get my license to be a regular agent, I just wanted to use it for myself because the agents that I was coming across, wonderful people, and they wanted to help me. They had the ambition. They just weren't trained to work with me and the investors. They were trained to help us buy our own homes. And I'm not knocking agents. Believe me, I've trained 24,000 plus agents personally over the years. The problem is the investor mindset is different. It's a different set of terminology and methodology. So traditional agents think they can help investors because their brokers are telling them they can. It's just part of the business, something you do off to the side if you want. But when you make it your focus and your niche, you're gonna go a lot further, a lot faster, because most agents don't do that. And that's exactly what we did. I built a brokerage out of that model, and we were the fastest growing brokerage in Pennsylvania for 3 years running during the worst recession in 80 years. So in any case, sorry to ramble, but back to your original point, you'll find in the corporate world plenty of people that will either take that step and buy their own freedom, or they'll just take the what I call the low road, stay put because it feels safer, and they become miserable. I know people out there listening to this know what I'm talking about. Miserable, thinking they got to do that for 40 years for a pension and medical and dental, and it's what. Life is too short, guys.
Yeah, and it seems like they don't have the right lever to pull. At least for me, it was like, okay, I was salary at the time, and I knew generally I was making maybe call it $37.50 an hour, and I was like, oh, if I did really well, I might get a bonus in 6 months that might eke my dollar per hour to $42 per hour, on a general average. But I was like, and if I did really bad, I got paid the same salary, but maybe went down on the totem pole, but just good enough not to get fired. And it's like, well, I didn't feel like that leverage was quite there. And so it was like, well, I couldn't pull on that enough. And so once we started getting into investing, we helped the first agent that we bought buy 13 homes in 12 months. And I was like, oh, we helped her become the number one real estate agent in North Dakota, because they ended up we found a really good investor friendly agent. And then you did one, she went above and beyond. And then we're like, oh, well, repeat business. And we're just going to buy 12 homes in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And away we go. And we've had kind of similar stories along that on the real estate agent side. As we're trying to list some homes, it was one home that we just listed 2 days ago. The individual in Illinois got that property turned around in a week. Just nice. Knew who to talk to, who was a good, I call them the AAA players. They haven't made it to the major leagues yet, so they don't charge you $150 an hour. They charge you $75 an hour, but this guy knew all the local people. They're like, oh, they do good work. They're not booked out 6 months. And that property, got turned around just like that, versus another agent's like, well, you're going to need to get the carpets cleaned. Okay. Yeah. So you want me to do that, versus oh, here's the phone number. Turns out I've already called them. Here's their cell. They're already coming. Are you okay with me paying $125? It is night and day difference on how well, just from buying your time back. But then, it leads to profit too, just from a holding time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Time is money. That's the thing about investing is every day your property's sitting there either empty if it's a rental, or empty because it's not finished being remodeled for sale as a flip. That's money out of you. It's not only money you're not gaining, it's money out of your pocket, because every day you've got electricity, water, gas, property taxes, insurance, all accumulating on a daily basis, So having those the partners, see, I call their investor agent a member of your team, a partner. When you have the right partner on your team, man, you're going to go a lot further, a lot faster,
For sure. And especially we were chatting a little bit beforehand of part of it too that started the instigation was man, I didn't like being told what to do. Maybe I'm a control freak. Maybe I'm a little bit different, but just the idea of having to be somewhere at a specific time and getting that quote unquote passive income, which I think is more a little bit like leveraged income. Like you're still going to do a little bit, but it just, what kind of lever can you pull? That's your unique capability. Maybe it's a unique niche. Maybe it's something, maybe it's someone, maybe it's how you do something. Maybe it's the fact that you can walk into any bank and automatically get a pre-approval letter. Turns out there's a lot of people that just can't do that. So how can you, partner up with them? And it's just so much fun. I love real estate. And that was like, the first kid being born. And there's just something when that life event happens, you're like, man, I love this person so much. And number 2, number 3 comes along, and I just don't know how it was possible or how we would still be possible with 2 working spouses, 3 young kids, like the demand on you physically, on your sleep, on everything. Like I don't know that I'll, not having the season, I'll have to defer to you, Gary, of like, I don't know if there's a more challenging time on me financially, on my health, on our marriage, on how important it is for our kids by the time they turn 7 or 8, how much they've been programmed just with their own personality, the character value. So I was like, all of this is just so critically important that was enough motivation for me to get up early and put in the work.
Yeah. You got it. Well, I'll tell you what, I went through the same thing, and I admire you for going through it. When your kids are still young like that. I know when I was still at the bank, still in the corporate world, and my children were still younger. They were in grade school. And so, I would go to, like, when my daughter was in preschool, and my son too, by the way, too, when they had the days where it's bring your parent to school day, I was often the only dad there, And in fact, I told my employees, the people that work for me at the bank, I said, look, I would tell them what I know. I said, my daughter, this is a special day. It's Thanksgiving. They're doing a play. I'm going, and I encourage you to do the same thing. If you have a child in school, a special event, you don't just tell me you're going to take off a couple hours. Believe, because in our world back then in IT, we would get called in at night, called in on the weekends when systems would go down. I said, look, you're going to make up for it. I want you to have the time with your kids. So I did that. And I got to have some wonderful memories. And children, they're very resilient, but they're sponges, and they remember everything. And my kids remember that stuff. They're now 29 and 32. And I'm getting ready to be a granddad here. I understand. So that's good news. But I never forget I'll tell you this one story briefly, but I want you to tell us your story too. So my son was finishing his fifth grade, last day of elementary school before he went to middle school. And they had the typical field day where you're outdoors all day playing kickball and doing sprints and having games and things like that. So I took the day off to go do that. And at work, something happened at the bank, and one of the other managers called me. And we were corporate managers, not out in the branches. We were on the corporate side. So we were pretty high up. We were reporting directly to the executives. And she said, I think you need to come in here and manage us. And I said, please forgive me, but I respectfully disagree. I don't need to be there. This is my son's last day of elementary school, and you couldn't pull me away with a F-14, jet, because nothing's going to drag me away from this. This is too special. And I said, by the way, I've got a team of people that I've trained that are experts at their jobs. I guarantee you talk to Dave and Jim, who are my 2 generals, they will solve everything you can throw at them, And by the way, that was the end of June. 2 months later, August 13th, 2003, I officially retired from the corporate world. I'd let them know 3 weeks in advance, but that was my last day. And I've never looked back, never regret it. Now, the transition, I wasn't something I just did on a whim. It wasn't like an emotional decision. Initially it was, but I planned for it. So my plan was, when I had enough capital to have 4 real estate projects going on at once. In other words, at some stage of purchasing, remodeling, refinancing, either renting or selling, 4 projects underway, and enough cash flow coming in from my existing rentals to match my corporate income. And then I would leave. And that took me, from the prior December when I knew I was going to do it, it took me whatever that comes out to 7 or 8 months to pull that off. So when it came to insurance, I got my own insurance, private. It was because I was now an independent business. I got my own insurance for the family and I. and didn't have to worry about vacation because now every day was vacation for me, right at that point. And we had dental. I had all the proper insurances in place. So the transition was a smooth transition. It wasn't a knee-jerk thing. Did I really want to go 8 months before? You better believe it. Could I have done it financially? Absolutely. But I wanted to make sure I did it correctly. I also wanted to make sure my real estate business was able to stand on its own legs and keep going whether I worked or not. So that was really, Adam, that was probably the practical, tactical way of how I pulled that off. So in any case, so sorry to go long on that. What I'm really excited about what you're doing is you're doing it much earlier than I did. And you actually have a passion for other, you're a dad, I'm a dad. But particularly with dads, you have a passion for that, working dads trying to make this going. So would you mind touching on that a little bit? We'll be right back with the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast after I invite you to Monday Night Live. Every Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, I teach a class without fail for you on subjects ranging from flipping to buying rentals, managing rentals, wholesaling, commercial, creative purchasing techniques, analyzing properties, identifying properties, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of subjects. And if you are a licensee, if you have a real estate license, you should definitely tap in because there are a lot of investor agents also in the class. Many of them are on the global investor agent team. So you can learn from them as well as from me how to actually work with investors correctly and profitably. All right, we'll see you Monday night. The link is in the show notes. Go ahead and register. We'll get right to the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast.
Sure. I noticed that when I was trying to seek information about dads that really wanted to be involved, especially with young kids, I couldn't find a ton of information. It was maybe it's a generation thing, but where Gary's a little bit more of the paying off the fruits and was ahead of your time. Like my dad was like, I'm going to work 70 hours. If you need anything else, go to mom. And that was kind of the mentality that I grew up with. And so I think it was a lot of this, moms with the kids before they're 7. And then after that, dad challenges them a lot, which I was like, oh, that's kind of like the old Spartan way. It was like before they were 5, they were with mom and you give them unconditional love. And after that, you kind of challenge them. But I noticed that there's a shift to, maybe both parents working, but realizing the benefit of a dad's role when the kids are young. And I don't know that men have been trained or exactly wired to handle that. And so it's really easy for Adam to say, oh, I got to work and I could sneak away and I could buy some real estate and I'm really good at it and make me happy. But to be honest, it's a little bit of a cover and it's a little bit shy because being there with my son who's 3, who's going through a temper tantrum as a toddler and just like trying to emotionally regulate him and, give him some unconditional love. Like I'm trying to think of, is the one property that I bought that might be worth $200,000 when all the debt's paid off versus that moment with my son and allowing that time freedom in there and having that space. And so I think working dads specifically that have young kids are really, really, really strapped for time. And I wanted to jump just similar to you. I want as soon as I got the real estate thing, I was like, man, let's do this. Let's go all in. But it makes so much more sense of, I had another mechanical engineer mentor of mine. He's like, he goes, Adam, you're 25 yards from shore. You could just jump and swim like hell, or you could wait a year or two. And if you do it at 30 versus when I did it at 32, is it really going to matter in a grand scheme of things? But I was like, man, that's when my kids were 3 and 1. And I could really feel that pressure because kids spell love TIME. That's all they want is just your time. And so I now have this rule where it's like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's kind of my own model of 50 hours of sleep, 40 hours of family time, 30 hours of work, 20 of personal time, and then 10 of just float that kind of fills in. That generally gets you to 150 hours a week. And I've noticed that if I've done that, where I'm there with my kids in the morning and I'm there in the evenings and I'm there on the weekend, my kids are so much more well regulated. There's still the temper tantrums, there's still all that. But I was like, I really subscribe to the Mother Teresa. If you really want to go change the world, just go home and love your family. But there's so much pressure, especially on dads with young kids, because to be honest, our patience isn't there. My wife can love and nurture the hell out of our kids, just unconditionally, more than where I'm kind of knock it off, you 3-year-old, right? I maybe just don't have the same tactical empathy, maybe that are magnificent others have, but there's still something special in there of teaching them cause and effect at a really early age. If you do this, here's what's going to happen. And because it's so front ended, I just thought that there might be a need for individuals that are like, number one, wanted to get to that point of freedom where they can go, just the idea of going to 20 hours a week can sound like nirvana to some people. If you were only working 20 hours a week versus the 40, 50, 60, whatever people are like, trapped into, like, imagine what you could do with that. And so that would be my goal, is to get someone to 20 hours a week because they've gotten, either 50% or 60% of their income replaced. And you did it a little bit differently with, having active projects and different things. And for me, I think investors get into wealth building, but what I want to try to help them with is pure high cash flow, because it's typically the passive initial cash flow that's going to allow them to buy their home or buy their time back. Even though wealth is generally a great, like, you could do a multifamily, you could do a syndication and your money doubles in 5 years. But really what I'm trying to be like, hey, how can you get cash flow day one? And with that day one allows you to then see, like, okay, maybe I'm not building wealth, but I'm replacing the income. And so that just got a special place in my heart, just with working dads who's got kids, under the age of 7, and then building kind of a community around that so we can kind of grow up. And then I'm sure we'll all come into the teenage years, at the same time, and kind of having a cohort to go around. So I'm in a bunch of different mastermind groups for dads, but it was just, I don't know that I'm going to have any higher return on investment than that time with the kids.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I do believe that post World War II, there were some major shifts, at least in our country, if not worldwide, economically, socially, politically, militarily, in every way. I mean, if you just look at the newsreels, we've gone through an awful lot. And one of the changes is there was a big change in how the family dynamics were. Like you said, our fathers and grandfathers, generally they were the workers, right? And the mom was their nurturer, and that's how they raised their families. And the dads really didn't, I wouldn't such as I know their kids, but they didn't get to experience a lot of the events that children go through, like the bring your parent to school day, for example, or being able to coach softball and baseball and soccer and things like that. That didn't come around until probably like in the 70s. It started in the 60s, and the 70s became more prevalent. That's when we were able to actually be in a delivery room and watch our children being born. That was in the 70s, So in any case, a lot of transformation, but then the other challenge was socially. There has been a lot of pressure, unfortunately, not, I would call it negative pressure, but there was a lack of emphasis on the nuclear family and having two parents together. That emphasis shifted away. Hey, it's okay to be a single parent household. And I'm not knocking people that have had to do that. I mean, my parents divorced when I was little, and for a while we were just with my mom. But the problem is that's now become like more of, people are pushing it like more of the norm. And if you notice, in all the media and all the programming, the dad's out of the picture. It's just a shame, because you need mothers and you need fathers too. We bring something different to the family equation, and we play different roles. The role of a father is different than the role of a mother. Are there some crossover? Absolutely. I change as many diapers as any woman out there, I'm telling you. And I did all the go to school with the kids, and I was often the only dad. But at the same time, there are things that my kids got for me. Like, for example, when my son inherited a 1981 Camaro Z28, T-top, dual exhaust, 350, the whole 9 yards. He was 13 years old, and I told him, I said, it was white. He wanted to be black. I said, okay, you're going to work for me on the properties. You're going to cut grass because you're old enough now. And for every dollar you save, I will match you dollar for dollar. Or darn if he didn't save $6,000 in 3 years. So $12,000. But he called me. I was at a conference one week, and he called me. It was a Friday night. I was on the way home getting to the airport, and he said, Dad, I just want to ask you, I want to go on a date with Carly. Carly's a great gal. And he said, I want to take the Z28. He was of age. I said, Andrew, just so you know, that car has what's called classic car insurance. Technically, you have to be 25 to drive by yourself. If you go out on your own, I said, it's your car. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just going to give you something to think about. Said, chances are nothing bad will happen. You go out and have a great date and everything's going to be fine. but then you want to do it again. You're going to push the envelope. Something may happen eventually. Could be something small, like you run a stop sign by accident or you get a speeding ticket. They're going to find out you didn't have insurance to cover you at that age. It's going to be a problem. I said, next thing could happen is you get a little fender bender, your car's damaged. It's going to really be painful and insurance won't cover it. You're going to have to cover it because it's your car. I said, the worst thing that happen is you get a major accident and somebody gets hurt. Then it's a real problem. I said, of the four scenarios, only one of those scenarios is good. I just want you to go back and think about it. And you tell me what you come up with on your own. Call back 5 minutes later and said, Dad, I think I'm going to take the old minivan. So, mom might have said the same thing. I don't know, but she might have, maybe he wouldn't have told his mother. Who knows what would have happened? But that's an example. And again, I'm not saying moms can't play that role. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, there's things that kids will go to moms for, and there's things that kids will go to dad for, right? And I think what you do is so valuable. And I'm spending time on this because money is not the ultimate goal, guys. It's a measurement of how well you do achieving your goals. And one of your goals should be have a balanced life and be a good dad, be a good mom, be a good brother or sister, and husband and wife, and do the best you can in all the roles in your life. Investing is just one role. Does it give you money? Absolutely. Can money buy you a lot of fun things? Absolutely. But I tell you, at the end of the day, a car gets rusty. A house needs a new roof. You buy another house, you buy another car, but you only have one son and one daughter. I mean, you might have 3 daughters, but one Jane, one Rebecca, one Shamika. You only have one of those. You can't just go put a new roof on a kid's head, and you can't go get a new kid. So keep that in mind. The money will come when you have the balance in life. And hey, what I want to do is, I know we're going to get short on time here, is let's talk about a little bit, if you don't mind. When I'm looking at some of your material, one of the great questions is, let's say you have the time to do this, and you can show your kids, by the way. One of my favorite podcast guests is in Ohio. He had one of his sons buy his first house when he was 11. The second son bought his first house when he was 7. He only had 2 sons. He didn't have daughters. And his one son had written a book by the time he was 16. So involve your children in this entrepreneurial journey of investing in real estate and building, buying your freedom, if you want to call it that. But when it comes to that, what do you say to people like me? When I first started, Adam, was, I'm afraid of managing tenants or losing money, because I experienced a little bit of both of that, and it's a real fear. But do you come across that yourself too when you work with people?
That I think that's the number one that people go into it. And sometimes one of the short answer is, oh, just get a property manager. But sometimes that doesn't quite register for some people, because well, then the numbers don't quite work out, or then I got to manage the manager, and how does that work? And I think everyone is sitting on their own unique niche. And it took us a couple times to find out what ours was. And we eventually did a bunch of stupid stuff, tried to flip some houses that were, 100 years old. Turns out that doesn't work very well. And everything seems like a shiny ball. And so what I always, kind of taught people was like, why not list your first home for rent before you move? Like whatever house you're in right now, before you move, just list it for rent. Put it at the ask me to move price. Like your house is worth $500,000. Someone's got to pay $6,000 a month in rent to live it. And if no one shows up, okay, great. That's perfectly fine, because then that house, that area. And so we kind of stumbled onto this idea of, why not find the person first and the property second? Find someone that doesn't need to be managed. And so where we kind of found that out was, as an engineer, turns out I could go to any bank with an 800 credit score and a W-2 and pretty much get a pre-approval letter. Everyone was fighting over that. But I got my buddy who would be Adam today, right? I'm self-employed. On paper, I don't make any adjusted gross income because I depreciate everything out. And technically on paper, I can't get a loan. And so I had a buddy that was like, hey, for you, it takes 5 minutes, you could get a pre-approval letter. What if you bought me a house? I paid you the mortgage plus $500 a month. You don't have to do anything. I'll come up with all the cash. And I was like, that sounds really easy for me. Like, what's kind of the catch? He's like, well, I'll put down, 10 or 20%, whatever you have to put down, for the bank loan, whatever your interest rate is, I'll pay the principal, insurance, taxes, whatever it is. And then I'll give you $500 for kind of your risk in it. In the event that I default, you get to keep the down payment, you get to keep everything else. And so that's really where we started to find this niche of people that couldn't quite get a bank loan, buy them a home, and then eventually they bought it from us, so that we were acting more like a bank than a landlord. And once we did that enough to reach financial independence, then we turned it into a business where now all we're doing is connecting professional men and women with these individuals. And you'd be like, hey, like, in general, I might go to Gary, like, hey, Gary, would you buy me this $700,000 house in Fargo? You'd probably be like, well, I'd probably want to know a little bit about Adam, and I'd probably want to know a little bit about the asset and what the economics are. So we break that down, like, what's their credit score, their history, how much skin are they putting in the game, what kind of rent guarantee insurance can you place on it, just like private mortgage insurance, what's the house appraised for, almost just like a bank. So, but instead of you just lending money at like a 6 or 7%, you can actually take title, get a higher spread, and get kind of like a 30% cash on cash ROI as the target, for all of our funds. And it's just fun being able to help that out. And then putting someone who just like went the whole cycle, got into it. Yesterday, they closed on a $400,000 home that they eventually bought back because they needed 9 months until they could, get whatever the bank needed from FHA or whatever the requirements are. And that's what's really cool, because then you get the 5-star review and you feel pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, that I love the model, and I know the returns. Some people are thinking, my gosh, I can barely get 10%. But when you factor everything in, guys, you don't just have the cash flow. You have the cash flow, obviously, that's the main thing when you're buying rental properties, it's the cash flow. But you do have appreciation. You do have depreciation, the phantom write-off, right, of the privilege of owning the property. It's a paper write-off. And you do have equity buy down. I mean, eventually your tenants are paying the mortgage, so you're not only is the property appreciating, but you're even if it didn't appreciate at all, if the mortgage gets paid down, you have increasing equity. And the fifth way is later on, heck, you could refinance it, you could sell it, you could repurpose it, put it into a REIT, all kinds of things you can do. But to get those returns, it takes work. And you and I think this is where you and I shine. We have a lot in common because of our backgrounds. But can you explain to people why is it so hard to not only find but analyze and fund, like in this case, single family investments? That's the bread and butter, right?
Yeah, so that's our niche. So we have two different things. Where number one, we're buying homes, owner occupied homes for people that can't quite get a bank loan. But then at the same time, we got another business, Equity Flip with two P's, that actually we're partnering with investors or wholesalers or flippers, where we'll actually come bring all the capital. They find the deal, they manage it, and then we split the profits. But in general, it's like that's the number one complaint I hear is like, I can't cash flow anything at a 7.5 or an 8% interest rate. Like, who's buying all these properties? There's low inventory. This is what it is. And it's what's the highest and best use of a property. And sometimes that could be a short-term rental. Sometimes it could be a midterm rental. Sometimes it could be a long-term rental. Like, just find out, like, okay, just like when you list your home for sale, you want the best offer. You don't want the 3rd, 5th, or 10th best offer. So instead of finding the property and trying to make that work, all we do is we find the person and we say, hey, in general, how much are you willing to pay for a home? And they say $3,000 a month. You say, great, go pick out any home for $280,000 or less. I'll buy the home for you if you put down 5%. And then they go pick the home, and you already know that the numbers are going to cash flow. You still get an inspection, you still get the, appraisal contingency, but then that way you have the person lined up. And that's what I like, is just the no vacancy. You don't have a property manager, on the deal. There's no CapEx, there's no maintenance, because once you tack on all four of those, 10%, 8%, 5%, 10%, like that's what really makes it hard for a deal to cash flow, is when you add in the CapEx and maintenance, which a lot of times you generally need. But that's why we offset that with an option fee or a down payment from the tenant buyer, is because if they do default, we have what's called rent guarantee insurance, which I didn't realize was a thing. Like, I was like, how do banks do it? Like, if someone's putting down 3.5%, they're like, oh, they get private mortgage insurance. I was like, oh, well, can I get that? And they're like, no, you're not offering a mortgage. You're doing a lease with an option to buy. It's a rental. I said, oh, well, can I get private renters insurance? And it turns out there's 3 companies, the Guarantors, Leap Easy, and then Single Keys in Canada coming to the US. But like, for $80 a month, if they move out, I get 6 months of lost rent.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So if the highest risk is them coming in with 10 grand and moving out, which I then have insurance to pay me 15 grand, I have a 25 grand hedge against something in addition to the normal rent. And so that's where it's like, we just started slowly learning, stacking insurance policies, vetting these individuals, having no vacancies, having no capex because they have the repairs and maintenance. And it's just one strategy of many that could work. And so now we don't search for a single home. All we're doing is finding agents, loan officers, and individuals that can't get a bank loan but want a home now. And of course, they can wait, they can rent, they can wait and get a mortgage. But there's certain people that are like, I'm moving from Nashville to Texas. The guy makes 18 grand a month. He's like, I don't want a rental. He goes, I want a place. I don't want to move in a year. I want a place with a pool. We got him a $550,000 house. And all he's doing is he's paying a premium for rent, locking in a purchase price for 3 years so that it cash flows for an investor out in California that we hooked up with this deal, that they get the cash flow. This person eventually buys the home back from them. And then the investor can 1031 it, take the profits, do whatever he wants. And we can go help the more investors and people get into homes.
Yeah. Well, I love the model, especially there's a lot of people out there coming out of the pandemic that I think would be in this boat. I mean, a lot of people think about all the landlords that were unable to evict tenants during the pandemic. And the tenants, there was a moratorium on those. The tenants didn't have to pay rent. And yet the owners, non-owner occupied owners, were not part of the mortgage forbearance. They still had to pay their mortgage payment because they were absentee owned properties. So, but the government didn't have a program for them. They probably had to exhaust a lot of their capital to stay afloat. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, you mentioned something, you touched on it a few times, is it's the people that comes first. They're all the agents. If you listen to what Adam just said, he looks for the agents, the lenders, and the people that have that need. You're one of the three people that Adam looks for. You're the agent. I really encourage you to study, practice, become an investor agent, become a valuable resource for investors, because it's going to become a larger part of the business, whether you're ready for it or not. Might as well be prepared for it. But if you wouldn't mind, I know we're going to kind of wrap this up, but talk about the people first philosophy, because it does apply to multiple areas. I love the fact that you put that first. You find the people first, and the properties will appear. Essentially, I know it's not that simple, but it really is.
That's right. Yeah. So I'll do two scenarios. We have a flip going in Pensacola, and then a home that we just put somebody in Illinois. So on the flip, I had an investor who's like, yeah, I'm flipping homes, but you know what? If I do a hard money loan, then I got to pay a monthly interest, and I have this great deal, but I just don't quite have the capital. And it's like, oh, great. I knew the person. I knew like he's got some experience. I just said, how about this? I'll fund your deal 100%. Don't worry about it. And then once you flip it, sell it, we'll split the profits. And to me, a good person can make a bad deal, but a bad person can make a good deal go bad. Like if I had a really good flipper, like if they run into problems or different things, like if you got a really smart person, like they can solve and overcome, like, oh, you know what? We ran into a backed up sewer, but don't worry, I got a guy. Or we've seen this before, we built in some contingencies. And so like, I think a good person can make a bad deal, salvageable in general. And then same thing when you're trying to put someone in a home. But if you get a bad deal and you just get like an investor or general contractor, they can really screw some things up where you pay for a roof 3 times. And so on the flipping side of things, we love to find individuals first, and then they're going out and finding the deals. And so for me, it's like, why not find the person first instead of trying to be what everybody else is doing, kind of finding the properties. It's like, okay, I'm going to go find that person. And so similar to like a real estate agent, they'd be like, oh, what if I talk to Adam? And my model was, I'm just going to find all the people that can't get a bank loan, and I'm just going to be Adam's real estate investor agent for this area, and I'm going to own it. And turns out Adam's going to be my client for everything. And so you can find that. Maybe you want to be, listing, maybe you want to list investors' property, but like once you get through that cycle, like you can kind of go through it. So same thing on the finding what we call a tenant buyer, or someone who can't get a bank loan. We just find them, give them, just like the bank would give you a pre-approval terms, like max purchase price, down payment, general interest rate. We just gave that same pre-approval letter and just say, hey, go talk with the real estate agent. They often pick the real estate agent. And so we're working on something like, hey, could we do some sort of larger partnership with something like EXP? Because we're basically creating these new home buyers out of thin air that couldn't get pre-qualified before, but now these agents are getting new buyers. And then depending on whether or not that individual exercises their option or how long they stay into it, well, then we're going to list the home too.
Yeah. I love it. It's an excellent model. very timely, very, very much needed. And the funny thing is not, well, I shouldn't say funny. The beautiful thing is it's applicable in almost every market. I mean, there's no market where you can't do this, So it's a need at the people level. It doesn't matter if you're in San Francisco or Dayton, Ohio. I mean, there are going to be differences, yeah, absolutely, but the model is going to work, So
Yeah,
yeah,
and if I could share one last story, the model
yeah,
of how this came up was we were in a college town, and it was just like, yeah, there's just college rentals are kind of what they are. You can stuff 7 people into a 3-bedroom, right? That you just
yeah,
as many people as you can put in, and there's usually not very good. So that was our first model. We just said, hey, college students, what's your max rent amount? They would enter in on our website and be like, oh, cool, go pick out any Zillow home listed for sale underneath this price. And then we would just cash flow rental properties because in my area, there's 1,200 homes listed for sale and there's 120 homes listed for rent. So all I'm doing is having them go find one of the 1,200 homes that they want so that I don't buy it and hope that I can find a renter.
right. Yeah, it's genius. So, well, I'll tell you what, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour here, and we probably went way overboard, but time-wise, but there's so much content here, and everybody listening, this is probably the first time when we spent more time focusing on the personal aspect of this business of investing, because it is really important. I know some of you listening know what I'm talking about. When you're trying to juggle your job or your business and being a spouse and a parent and trying to invest at the same time, it can be done. I mean, I'm not the only living example. Adam is also a living example. Reach out, talk to people, call us, email us. So Adam, how can people get a hold of you? What the emails, websites? What's the best way for people to find you?
Sure. So our kind of signature rent to own program is the homeequitypartner.com/investors, where they can learn more how we're doing that. They can go try to do it themselves in their own backyard. There's like a free lease option agreement if someone's curious what that looks like. They can download it there. If anyone's curious on the community of kind of the working dads trying to juggle, I call it being in the thick of it. You got a young business, you got a young marriage, you got young kids, and it's just like, does anybody else understand what it's like when my toddler stares me down and pulls out and and empties out a bowl of Cheerios right in front of my face? Like, yeah, we hear you, we see you. They can do that. Otherwise, my personal email is just adam@homeequitypartner.com, and then I'm on various social medias if you want to search.
Okay, so homeequitypartner.com/investors.
Investors. Yep, with an S. Yep.
Investors. I'm sorry, with the S at the end. All right, and then the engineeringrei.com. Okay, freedom for dads with young kids. And then the email, I'm sorry again, was that Adam at?
Yep, adam@homeequitypartner.com.
Gotcha. Okay, excellent. So everybody, please, not while you're driving, of course, but when you get home or get back to work, write that down. Remember, you can always re-listen to this and fast forward and go right to the end to pick up these. We'll also put them in the show notes. We'll have these in the show notes for you if you want to browse that on your favorite podcast channel. And I'll wrap this up with a favor to ask of you, listener, is please leave a review. Reviews are what make the podcast world go around. We don't get paid for this. It's a community service, and we love to hear your feedback too. We want to constantly improve the game and serve the community. So if you could do that, that'd be great. And while you're out there, go visit homeequitypartner.com/investors, right? Or engineering REI. And before you leave the website, the internet, go visit globalinvestoragent.com, pick out an investor agent in your area, and at the same time, get a hold of Adam. Remember, email adam@homeequitypartner.com. Okay. And if you are an agent and you want to be a bigger part of this, definitely reach out to Adam and definitely reach out to me. You can on the website, globalinvestoragent.com, you have the option to leave your name and number or email, and you actually will get a one-on-one with me. No kidding, no strings attached. It's just a good old-fashioned conversation. And you'd be surprised at how many people don't do that. I mean, it's just like I give it out there, and we give away so much on our website, Adam. We give away so much information and knowledge and tools and strategies and books. And but I think consumers are sometimes skeptical. They can't believe that this is actually possible. But here we are. We're living proof, So listen, everybody, take care of yourselves. God bless you and your families. We will see you on the next Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cash Flow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.